The bullet was meant for Thomas Reed. He knew it the moment he heard the shot. He knew it the moment he saw James move. And he spent the next 52 years knowing it every single day, in the particular way that survivors know things not as memory, but as weight. Constant. Unasked for. Present at breakfast, present at dusk, present in the long space between sleep and waking when the mind goes to the places it doesn't choose. James Calloway had stepped in front of a bullet that had his friend's name on it. He was 19 years old. He didn't hesitate. That was the part Thomas could never get past. Not the death. The absence of hesitation. James was from a sheep farm outside Ballarat, Victoria, the kind of place where the horizon goes on forever and the silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat on a still night. He had never left Australia before the war. He had never seen the sea until the troopship carrying him toward Gallipoli appeared to be sailing directly into the edge of the world. Thomas Reed was 24, a carpenter from Sydney, and he had been on the peninsula 3 days before James arrived, long enough to understand the grammar of surviving. Sleep on your side. Never raise your head to find where the shot came from. Eat fast. Don't make friends. He made an exception for James. He couldn't explain it in the letters he wrote home. "There's a kid in my section," he told his mother in June. "Doesn't complain. Doesn't boast. Just gets on with it. I've decided to keep him alive if I can." James, writing to his own mother that same week, "I met a bloke called Tommy. He knows everything. I'm going to be all right." By July they were inseparable in the way that only war makes possible. The world narrowed to a trench 12 inches wide, and the person beside you becomes the only fixed point left in it. They talked through the nights when sleep wouldn't come. Thomas described houses he was going to build, whole houses, designed properly, with rooms that made sense and windows that faced the right direction. James described the farm, the smell of the paddocks after rain, the way the afternoon light moved across the flat land, the silence that was actual silence, the kind you could carry with you. They argued about cricket. They argued about whether Melbourne or Sydney deserved to be called a real city. They divided cigarettes down to the last half-inch and neither man ever kept the longer half. When James got a fever in August that kept him shaking for 4 days, Thomas sat with him through the nights and described buildings room by room, the width of hallways, the height of ceilings, a garden at the back with a gate that opened east. He talked until James's breathing slowed and the shaking stopped and real sleep finally came. "I owe you one," James said when the fever broke. "That's not how this works," Thomas said. The patrol was in September. Pre-dawn, 7 men moving in single file through broken ground between the lines, looking for a gap in the Turkish position that intelligence said existed and probably didn't. The darkness was total, no moon, no stars, just the sound of boots on rock and the shallow breathing of men who had learned to move quietly or learned nothing at all. Thomas was second in the column. James was directly behind him. Thomas could tell where James was only by the sound of his breathing, steady, slow, the deliberate breath of someone who had made a decision to be calm and was holding to it. The shot came from above and to the left. A Turkish sniper in the rocks, elevated, firing down into the column at an angle. The muzzle flash was a single white point in the darkness and then it was gone. The first bullet struck the ground 6 inches to Thomas's left. Rock fragments sprayed across his boot. He felt one catch his ankle through the leather, sharp, small, there and then gone. He froze. Every man in the column froze. In the silence that followed, Thomas understood his situation with complete clarity. The sniper had his range. The adjustment would be small, a fraction to the right, a fraction down. Thomas was standing still in exactly the place the next bullet was coming, and his body had not yet decided what to do about it, and the time for deciding was already almost gone. He heard James exhale behind him. One long breath, pushed all the way out. The breath of a man setting something down. Then James was moving. Thomas felt it before he saw it, a presence sweeping past his left shoulder, fast and purposeful, one long step forward and across, putting himself between Thomas and the rocks above. The second bullet came. The sound of it hitting was different from the sound of it missing. Thomas had heard both enough times to know the difference without looking. He turned. James was already going down. His legs folded in the strange slow way of bodies that have received a message the mind hasn't processed yet. Thomas caught him before he hit the ground, one arm around his chest, lowering him, both of them going down together onto the cold rock. The wound was high on the right side of the chest. In the darkness Thomas could feel it more than see it, the warmth spreading through the fabric, the wrong kind of warmth. He pressed both hands over it and leaned down close. James looked up at him. His eyes were open and completely steady. Not fear. Not pain, or not only pain. Something else. The expression of someone who had made a choice and was at peace with it in a way that made Thomas want to grab him and shout at him, because peace was not what this was supposed to look like. "Tommy," he said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational. "Tommy," he said again, as if he just wanted to say the name. Thomas talked. The way he had talked him through the fever, describing rooms, describing windows, describing the garden with the gate that opened east. He kept his hands pressed down and he kept talking, and he did not stop until the medic arrived and pulled him back and told him in a flat voice that it was done. James Calloway died on the ground in the dark, 5 months and 11 days after arriving on the peninsula. He was 19 years old. The sniper did not fire a third time. Thomas survived Gallipoli. He survived the Western Front. He survived the Somme, which was its own particular species of impossible. He was wounded twice, once in the shoulder, once in the left hand, which healed badly and left 2 fingers that never fully straightened. He came home to Sydney in February 1919. 28 years old and feeling much older. He went back to carpentry. He built things carefully, with his crooked hand, one piece at a time. He ate. He slept. He answered questions about the war with short sentences and changed the subject when he could. But the nights were their own country. He would wake at 2, 3 in the morning with the sound of the second shot still in his ears, not the first one, never the first one, always the second, and lie in the dark of his room in Sydney with the ceiling above him and the city quiet outside and the understanding sitting on his chest like something with weight. That James was 19 and in the ground in a country that wasn't his. That Thomas was 28 and breathing. That the distance between those 2 facts was 1 step, 1/2 second, 1 decision made without hesitation by a boy who had told him that's not how this works, and then proved, conclusively, that it was. He didn't call it guilt. Guilt was what you felt when you'd done something wrong. This was different. This was the feeling of being alive when the arithmetic said you shouldn't be. Of carrying a life that had been handed to you without your permission, and not knowing what you were supposed to do with it. "I owe you one," James had said. Thomas lay in the dark and understood that the debt ran the other way. That it had always run the other way. And that there was only one thing left he could do about it. He could find them. He knew almost everything about the family. James had talked about them the way people talk about what they love before they know they love it, as simple fact, ordinary background. His mother's name was Dorothy. His father had died when James was 12, a farm accident, a tractor, an ordinary Tuesday that became the kind that splits a life in two. His sister was Alice, 2 years younger, and according to James she was the funniest person in the Calloway family and possibly in all of Victoria. She had once convinced their nearest neighbor that the government had banned the color blue, and the man had believed it for 3 weeks. James had shown Thomas a photograph once. The three of them in front of the farmhouse: Dorothy, James, Alice. James grinning, Dorothy looking at him the way mothers look at sons who are about to leave for somewhere dangerous and are trying not to show it. Alice slightly blurred, squinting into the sun, as if she had moved just as the shutter closed. Thomas had the photograph memorized without meaning to. He went to the records office first. The clerk directed him to the memorial ledger, the Anzac rolls, the names of the fallen. He found the C section and ran his finger slowly down the column. Calloway, James Arthur. Private. 1st Australian Division. Killed in action, Gallipoli, September 1915. He put his finger on the name and left it there. There was no grave to visit. James was buried somewhere on that peninsula in ground that had never been properly recorded, in a country that was not his. There was only this: a name in a ledger, ink on government paper, an entire person reduced to a single line between two others. Thomas sat with his finger on the name for a long time. Long enough that the clerk looked over twice and said nothing both times. Then he closed the ledger, thanked the clerk, and went to buy a ticket to Ballarat. Dorothy Calloway opened the door. She was a small woman with grey coming into her hair and the particular stillness of someone who has learned to carry the worst news inside them without letting it alter the surface. She had known since 1915. The telegram. The official letter. The silence after, which was its own kind of letter. She looked at Thomas standing at her gate and knew immediately who he was. Not his name, but who he was. "You were with him," she said. "Yes," Thomas said. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face, not grief, it was past grief, something closer to recognition. Then she said, "He always did find the right people." She stood back and let him in. He stayed 3 days. He told her the real things: the fever and the room descriptions, the cigarettes divided to the last half-inch, the arguments about cricket that James always lost and never once conceded. He told her about September. About the darkness and the 2 shots and what James had done in the half-second between them. Dorothy listened to everything without interrupting. She asked her questions slowly, one at a time, the way someone builds something careful, testing each piece before adding the next. Alice sat in the corner and said almost nothing on the first day. She was 19 now. The same age James had been. She had her mother's stillness and something else underneath it, a watchfulness, a precision, the quality of someone who listens to what isn't said as much as what is. On the second evening, after Dorothy had gone to bed, Alice came back to the kitchen and sat down across from Thomas. She was quiet for a moment, turning her teacup in her hands. Then she said, "He used to do that when we were small. Jump in front of things." Thomas looked at her. "There was a dog on the road once," she said. "Neighbor's dog, mean thing. It went for me and James just stepped in between. Just like that. He was 11. She paused. "He had a bruise on his arm for 2 weeks. He never mentioned it?" "Not once." She set the cup down. "He was always like that. He never thought about it first. That was just what he did." Thomas said nothing. He was looking at the table. "I used to think it was reckless," Alice said. "Now I think it was the other way. I think he just saw it very simply. Simpler than the rest of us." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the paddocks were dark and enormous under the stars. "He wrote about you," she said after a while. "In his letters. He said you knew everything." Thomas said, "He was generous." "He wasn't," she said. "James was a lot of things. Generous wasn't one of them. He was accurate." On the third morning Alice walked with Thomas out to the far paddock, where the land opened up and the horizon dissolved into sky. They stood there in the silence that James had described, in a trench 12 inches wide, actual silence, the kind you could feel pressing in from every direction. "He shouldn't have done it," Thomas said. The first time he had said it to anyone. Alice was quiet for a moment. "He would have done it for anyone in that column," she said. "That doesn't make it easier." "No," she said. "It makes it harder." She turned and walked back toward the house. Thomas stood at the edge of the paddock a while longer, with the silence and the enormous sky and the horizon that went on the way James had always said it did. Then he followed her back. He came back at Christmas. And the one after. He wrote to Dorothy every month short letters, practical, what he was building, how the hand was holding up. She wrote back. Inside her letters, folded small, were notes from Alice. The notes from Alice were longer than Dorothy's letters, and sharper, and they made him laugh out loud sometimes in a way that still surprised him, as if he hadn't fully expected laughter to still be available to him. In 1922 he came back to the farm and did not leave. He and Alice were married in April in the small church in town. Dorothy sat in the front row in her good dress, very straight, hands folded in her lap. Afterward, at the kitchen table, she held Thomas's crooked left hand in both of hers and looked at it for a moment, the two fingers that wouldn't straighten, the old scar across the palm with an expression Thomas couldn't quite name. Then she looked up at him and said, "He always did find the right people." It was the same thing she had said at the door, 3 years before. Thomas understood that she meant it both times. He built a new room onto the side of the farmhouse. Designed properly, with a window facing east so the morning light came in first thing. He built it slowly, with the hand that didn't work the way it used to, and it took twice as long as it should have. It was the best thing he ever built. He visited the records office in Sydney every year without fail. Every year the same ledger. Every year his finger moving down the C column until it stopped at the same place. Callaway, James Arthur. Private. Killed in action, September 1915. He would put his finger on the name and leave it there until whatever needed to pass had passed. Then he would go home to Ballarat. To Dorothy and Alice and the farm and the horizon and the silence James had always said was worth coming back to. He had 3 children. The oldest was a boy. They named him James. Thomas Reed died in 1967. He is buried in Ballarat, next to Alice, who went the year before. On his headstone there is a single line. Alice had taken a long time choosing the words. In the end she used James's. He knows everything. James Callaway. Ballarat, Victoria, 1896 Gallipoli, September 1915. Age 19. Thomas Reed. Sydney, 1891 Ballarat, 1967. Age 76. The farm is still in the family.